So I always wonder what visitors must think. I have to confess, when Jakey and I were brainstorming this, we were having a glass or two of wine after our Monday night discussion group. So this idea of pondering, of just thinking about things, of meeting strange people in strange places, of struggling with ultimate questions. Death, which is also represented by the loss of love, the loss of job, the loss of sense of self, the existential realities that we face every moment. These average things, these moment-to-moment, everyday, normal things, songs like Coldplay, the birds fly from underground. But we would understand it at some point if we could just see it. The everyday explodes with invitation. The everyday explodes with sacredness. The thing I love so much about this text this morning that we heard, this text from John, is familiar. I'm the vine, you are the branches. This notion in which we are interconnected with God, that we are interconnected through our connection with Christ. Now I'm going to step aside for a second and just say a quick word because I'm going to do a series coming this summer. And whenever we talk about God or whenever we talk about Christ, our minds go in a couple of dozen different directions. And each one of those directions is so concrete it almost becomes frightening to think otherwise. Which is, of course, I'll take a side note, which is advertising. We have the jar of change. If you fear it, leave it here. So if you get scared for a moment, come up and bring some money in here. Leaving money for others always helps us get over our preoccupation, I think. But we get so concrete about what we think sometimes that I'm going to suggest it's idolatry. I just come right out and say, if we think too concretely about some things, we forget that there's so much more than we understand. So we'll have this whole series on what it is we talk about when we talk about God. For now, all I want you to do is to go with me. Just let go of anything else for the moment, any other preconceptions, any other hard-held sort of concepts in your brain. Let go of all of that for now and just go with me with this idea that we are connected to God, that we are inextricably, undeniably connected to the mystery of all being. As Paul said, at the one in whom we move and live and have our being. We are interconnected like a vine. But then how does that vine bear fruit? Do you remember the second part of that verse? And this is where trust comes in. It bears fruit through love. When we not just love one another, because that's where we go. It doesn't say that. It just says love. As God is love. As God loves me, the text says, so I love you, and so must you love. That's what it says. One of the interesting things that Elizabeth Gilbert says in her book on this section on trust is she says, trust is one of these things that we sort of wait for life to like us. We wait for inspiration to like us. If you ask writers and you say, what do you love? Do you love writing? Writers will say, well, yeah, that's why I'm a writer. Painters will say, well, yeah, that's why I'm a painter. Clay potters will say, that's why I do what I do. If you love your work as an engineer, yeah, because I love that. Then she said, when I asked the question, does it love you? The response is twofold. The response is either that's a crazy kind of question, or no, we have a love-hate relationship, which many of you probably can recognize in your own work at times, and if you have an artistic side to you, you probably recognize that. We often think of it as sort of the martyr side of our personalities. We do what we feel like we do because there's nothing else we can do. We feel called to this. We live within this reality of sort of angst with it. What she suggests is that's that false conception. That's that understanding that we're separate from stuff. When we recognize that we're connected, trust becomes something else. trust becomes participation. But how do you get past that anxiety? How do you get past that doubt? How do you get past that sense in which I don't think it loves me? I can tell you my whole life doesn't love me. Just look at my childhood. Just look at my previous relationship. Just look at the way people treat me at work. I can tell you life doesn't love me. I'm going to stand fast. I'm going to stand strong. No, life loves you. We are interconnected with God in the midst of all reality. We are interconnected with the mystery of life. So how do we trust it? That's when I kind of looked up the word, and I meant to tell Mike here to give me only 8 minutes here, so you can give me 7 minutes from now. Yeah, and just start playing. If I keep going, just play something and stop me. I want to make sure we have time for the last song and for Jakey. But here's this thought about trust then. What does it mean? You look up the word trust and you look up the root of it, and we think of trust as being something we can count on. Well, if that's the reality, then we're in a hard place, right? Can you count on everything going the way you expect it to go? Can you count on your job colleagues being the way you need them to be? Can you count on them not backbiting? Can you count on them not gossiping all the time? Can you count on your relationship being exactly what you want that relationship to be? Your partner's going to be exactly the way you expect that? If trust means I need to be able to count on, then we're going to continue to live in this dualistic reality, this tension, this inability to really experience what it means to be a part of the vine, and the vine a part of us. So I got to playing around with this idea of what is trust. And she has this word that she used where she says you can be a martyr, which is where most of us spend our time, or you can be a trickster. And some of you identify with that right off the bat. But that trickster has a different orientation to trust. A trickster messes with life, messes with their reality because they know whatever they do, something happens. Do they know what's going to happen? Of course not. Do you remember watching Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner? Loved that show. Now we know that he's always going to get it in the end because that's why we like Weichen. That's that what do we call that German word, Schadenfreude, that idea that we get to see someone else suffer. It feels kind of good sometimes. We do. We kind of like that sometimes. Not much of it. But we like seeing Wile E. Coyote kind of get it in the end. But here's the thing, no matter what he does, he can't predict how it's going to come out in the end, but he still does it. The trickster participates because of one thing, because intimately they're connected with life, and they know that that's their role, is to play. Now that got me curious when she said trickster. And I went back and looked up the root word of trust. And the root word of trust is to have courage. It's the same root word as courage. So I went and I traced that down. I looked at the root word of courage. And the same root word of courage means to take heart. To take heart. So then I played around with that, and I started looking at some of the root words of that, and I found out that that word has the same root word as to love. All these words share the same roots. Until I came up with this last one that suddenly occurred to me. I know this. I understand this one. And that was to delight. To delight in. What would life be? How could we get to that place where we delight in life? I remember it. I was 4. I remember it when I was 5, and my mom said, you get to go to kindergarten. And it was the first time, and I was ecstatic about that because she gave me this whole thing. Kindergarten is like Disney World. I mean, there's games, there's fun, there's great food, and we're going to make a special lunch, and we're going to get dressed up for it, and you'll get to play outside, and it's wonderful. And it was all those things, and I met new people, and then I got to do it another day. And I did it 5 days that week, and then after Sunday, I was kind of tired, and I remember saying to my mom, she came in and she woke me up, Tommy, time for school, what are you doing? And I said, I'm not going today. And she said, what do you mean you're not going today? Of course. I said, no, it was fun. I don't want to go today. She said, no, I don't think I explained it to you. Kindergartner, you go all the time. And I said, what? She said, no, you go every day. And I had this stunned look on my face, like this didn't make sense. Even Disney World wouldn't be fun every day. And I looked at her and I said, every day. She said, yeah, you go every day. I said, for how long? She got this serious look and said, 18 years. Maybe longer if you want a decent job. And it suddenly occurred to me I had been completely manipulated. Of course, that's how I look back on it, And then it was just this disappointment that I had to get up now, and now I had to put on clothes, and now I have to go to school. But there's this thing about life early on when we're young that we recognize. Robert Fulghum wrote it in his book, Everything I Needed to Learn, I Learned in Kindergarten. Do you remember that book? Came out in the 90s. I picked it up again and started reading it. What a great book. It's just all those lessons. Play, delight in, and make sure everybody's included. To me, that sounds a lot like the gospel. To delight in. Now, I don't know how you do that when you're dealing with depression necessarily. I don't know how you do that when you're dealing with grumpy colleagues at work. I don't know how you deal with that when you're feeling like there's somebody cutting you off on the highway. But I think it's an attitude that she calls in Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert calls it as stubborn gladness, and I want to call it trickster. That when we recognize we're part of the ivy, we're part of the vine, we just participate anyway. We find ways to delight in. We find ways to cultivate the curiosity. We find ways to ask, I wonder. Einstein said, A to B, logic is the easiest way to get from A to B. But he said, imagination will get you everywhere. Break out of the concrete. Break out of the I understand and I know what it is, exactly what I think and believe. I know exactly who those people are and why they're acting that way. I know exactly what they did when they cut me off. I know exactly why I feel depressed and what happened to me as a kid. Break out of all of that and decide, instead, I think I'm going to be curious. I think I'm going to explore. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to see what I can imagine. Amen.